Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our discussion today on Beyond Cotonou, Turning Point for the EU and the African, Caribbean and Pacific states, Shifting Dynamics and Partnering for Growth. I'm Shada Islam. I'm Director for Europe and Geopolitics at the think tank Friends of Europe. You know, when I was a young journalist, I followed the twists and turns, the ups and downs of the Lomé Convention. Yes, that's how far back I go. And then there was the Cotonou Agreement, and now we're at a very defining moment. We're talking about beyond Cotonou, and we're talking about modernizing this very special relationship, this very special partnership. We're looking ahead to how we can adapt this agreement to the new realities of the 21st century, the global landscape, the shifting dynamics of this rather disorderly and chaotic world. And many questions. I mean, how do you actually modernize this relationship? Why do we need to do it? What's in it for the African group, the Caribbean group, the Pacific group? What's in it for the European Union? What's in it for us? What's in it for the people? So I'm going to moderate this discussion with six very, very important people who all come with their different perspectives, their different points of view, but with one common aspiration, which is to update, modernize, and change the way we have operated for the last, 5 decades or so. So let me introduce you to them, and just a word, while I conduct this conversation, I'll be asking questions, but I want all of you to have your critical thinking caps on. There will be time for a Q&A, and also I'll be taking some questions by, I think, Twitter, internet, etc., whatever, online. So let me introduce these wonderful people. We have with us Honorable Rimbing Pato, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Immigration from Papua New Guinea, bringing the Pacific point of view into this discussion. The Honorable Robert Ducy, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Cooperation and African Integration from Togo. Welcome, bienvenue. Her Excellency Sheila Sealy Monteith, Ambassador of Jamaica to Belgium and the European Union. My old friend Patrick Ignatius Gomes, Secretary General of the ACP Group of States. Thank you for being here. And from the European Union, also an old friend, Stefano Manservisi, Director General DEFCO, giving the European point of view. Stefano will have to leave after his intervention, and he'll be wonderfully replaced by Koen Doens, Deputy Director General at DEFCO. So let's kick off with the first question to you, Honorable Minister Pato. So, in the Pacific, why are these negotiations, why is modernizing this agreement, this Cotonou, Beyond Cotonou agreement, why is it important for you?
Well, the Cotonou agreement, which is a partnership between the ACP and the EU, is very, very important because the world is interconnected, it is globalizing, and there are challenges that we have learned from the framework of the agreement, which will expire in 2020. So moving into the future to harness the opportunities and the challenges that were not in the contemplation of the first agreement, Lomé Convention, subsequently amended in Georgetown, and which will soon expire, we need to look at the experience and then move as partners forward so that we can make a contribution globally, because the ACP-EU partnership comprises of 50%, more than 50% of the member states of the UN. So we are really a force. And the partnership, if we are determined to stay united, which we have, it's going to bring benefits globally to mankind in terms of addressing the issues that the world faces today. Climate change, digital technology, sustainable development, and so on.
So the global alliance as well as what's happening on the bilateral level. Stefano, let's have a few words from the European Commission, from the European Union perspective.
Thank you, Shada, and I apologize because I said I have to leave quite early but Kun will be with you, and we are sharing all our experience, by the way, not only our thinking. I would like maybe to start in a slightly different way, because we start always talking about post-Cotonou. It looks a bit something, complex, a bit technocratic. Sometimes it is presented as a heritage of the past, something which has no roots, etc. Let me tell you one thing. The story of the group of the European Union and the ACP started in '75. And start on the basis of a specific choice, which was made by the ACP group that set up the Georgetown Agreement. And they decided to set up themselves freely as an interlocutor, the biggest group of the South in the '70s, negotiating with the biggest group of the North at the time, which is the European Union. Since '75, we have been building a story together. Together, first in the international relations, because even if at the time we didn't speak about globalization, but we were building together some form of globalization. Because at the middle of the '70s, nobody was thinking, in particular in the so-called developed world, to have an agreement which was basically the creation of a free space, duty-free, quota-free, with some limitation, of course, because the European Union was still building its common agricultural policy. This is story of the past, but this is also our story of the beginning. So the choice to do things following a principle and rules that today are presented as innovative as they are, but which have been the rules in our relation for decades: ownership, partnership, respect, dialogue, recognition of the differences. When the old system that maybe the youngest do not remember was called the STABEX, which was a small amount of money, but was based on a principle in the '70s that that the price of commodities is not in the hand of the producers, but in the hand of the stock exchange, only in the North. And we accepted as the European Union not only to put this principle into a treaty, but to put a mechanism in order to compensate for this. All these principles, including the fact that, when we sat, we said that we established together the priority. We listened to you, and then we put the money where you want, not where we want. Now it seems normal. It seems something on which everybody agrees. In '75, it was not agreeable so easily. And since then, we have created a community. We have created a form of, let's say, multilateralism, which has been useful. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But this is the story that we can tell with the ACPs. And therefore, in this moment, in this day, in which we are talking about the post-Cotonou, I think that we have to remind this. Because those saying, okay, this is an oldish model, which is maybe reproducing some old post-colonial reality, certainly there is a lot of truth on this. But on the other hand, those which are saying, let's dismantle this, doesn't make any sense at all, but please reflect in which kind of world we are living today. A world where multilateralism is not fashionable, a world under which we are working on the unilateral threats, and I mean, you understand what I mean, a world where peace is in doubt every day. Now, before giving up and say, all this is useless, let's think that this is the biggest group in the world, that if we are able to structure it better, to reward the difference better, it can change the world and can bring forward an agenda of sustainable development which could be unprecedented. It's a challenge. Is not something given for granted. There are experiences which are positive, what we did together in the climate change, experiences which are less positive. Maybe the good governance is not so, on the top of our agenda, but we did a lot. Therefore, post-Cotonou, number one, from our point of view, is not to give up and not to waste this common story and this common chance. Then to build on differences, because it is true that the three areas developed in the meantime. Africa has created the African Union. Africa has created a continental agenda. Africa has created an awareness of its duties and rights. And therefore, we have a dialogue with Africa structured since the year 2000, since that period. And I think then that it is important to have as African specificity in all this, which is not to put everybody around the same values, but to put everybody around a certain dialogue. Caribbean is the only region in the world with which the European Union has concluded successfully an economic partnership agreement. Is an area which, in contradictions, as we have contradiction, or is looking how to integrate better. It's an area which is suffering for vulnerabilities. Climate change is a reality in these islands. Vulnerability in spite of the GDP, GDP, a graduated country. What does it mean? Look at what has done in Dominica or in Antigua and Barbuda, in Barbuda in particular. One hurricane, GDP washed off. And our presence over there is since decades. They are standing, we stand with them. In the Pacific, it's far away, I'm not sure it's far away. It's an area of strategic interest where we are present since decades. We are present with our people, with our delegation, with our financing, with our intervention. We have an alliance on the ocean governance, on the climate change, on all the communalities which are putting at risk their life every day, food production, the quality of the environment, which are making our agenda in common. The Pacific is organizing itself around the Pacific Island Forums even more, and they stand in order to have more choices. The Pacific is far away. There are other countries in the Pacific. There are Australia, New Zealand, United States, China. But there is Europe. There are even pieces of Europe, some islands, New Caledonia, the Polynesia, etc. Like in the Caribbean, there are different realities of Europe. So all this suggests what? That we have a common story. We have a common values. We have common interest today in creating a multilateral, democratic and Pacific world, and we have specificities that we have to reward. Hence our approach, which is based on what? Keep the group, reform the group, identify the communalities, organize a regional partnership in order to liberate forces, resources, and potentiality. This is something which doesn't look to me particularly oldish or conservative. It looks to me rather one of the biggest challenges that the European Union has and the ACPs have, if we want to be consistent with ourselves. This is the approach. Maybe my presentation is a bit unconventional, a bit less, let's say, following the script, but the reality is this one, and this is the challenge that we have. I hope we will succeed altogether.
So Stefano, do you have time for one quick follow-up, right? So you've given us the historical context and you brought it into today and the chaos on the multilateral system. We say that this new Beyond Cotonou deal, whatever relationship we have, will be more political, right? Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I explained this in saying that if at the very beginning in '75 this was a very political choice, it is also true that all along the decades, sometimes this has been seen more as a framework in which we have to spend money. Let's be frank. We told that to each other, which has decreased the political content which was there, expressed in the 70s ways, of course, which is not the same. The European Union of the 70s didn't have a foreign policy, didn't have a security policy. At the end, didn't have even an internal market at the time. Now, we have an internal market, we have a Schengen area, we have many common policy, we have a common defense policy, we have a foreign policy, we changed. Our African friend, our Caribbean friend, our Pacific friend, according to their agenda, they change a lot. Now, it is time, I would like to say in this way, to go back in a new way to what the political spirit at the beginning, which was an alliance. Now, it's not just an alliance to spend money, is an alliance to contribute to the SDG and the implementation of the Agenda 2030, which is an agenda about sustainability of our world. And in this, political responsibility is big, because, you cannot say things and then don't do it. You cannot say things and then don't vote together at UN in the important moment. Sometimes in the past happened, too often it did not happen. Well, this is the agenda. And to be frank, we have to talk about democracy, we have to talk about human rights. All these are not only European values. If we want to have implemented the Agenda 2030, these are common values, not only in word, but also in action. We have a lot of things to do. The overarching theme of these development days is women, is gender. Well, we have a lot to do in Europe and the ACP countries. I think we have experiences, we have failures, we have plans. In the ACPs, they can tell stories which are different, but if we build a solid agenda of gender, about youth, together we can change the trends at world level. Ending violence, ending discrimination, empowering, which at the end is what? is more freedom, is more human rights, is more democracy. This is a communality which means more political agenda, and to be aware of this new reality in which we have, if we manage to create our relationship.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefano. I think some very vital points. I mean, you've mentioned climate change, the SDG agenda, and of course also, let's not forget, world trade is in a bit of shambles at the moment as well. So lots that we can do together as a political alliance. Thank you very much, Stefano. Minister Dussi, let's go to you. And Africa. I mean, Stefano has mentioned the importance of Africa, the strategic relationship that we have. From your point of view, the new relationship, the modernized relationship, what kind of contour, what kind of shape, what kind of content will it have? Monsieur Dussi is going to speak in French, so if you need your headsets, please turn it to the translation, interpretation now. Please, sir.
Thank you so much. I will speak in French and in English if you want.
Okay, good.
Thank you. First one, I'd like to congratulate you for this meeting, for this session. And let me tell you, je voudrais souligner.
I would like to stress that we have Commissioner Louis Michel with us this morning, who is a major player when it comes to cooperation between Africa and Europe and the ACP countries. And his presence here with us this morning is a great honour. He's very familiar with these subjects. He has invested a lot in that personally, and I would like to express our gratitude for everything that he has done on the African continent and for the ACP countries. Let me answer your questions quickly. Let me tell you that today there are challenges on the African continent, on the European continent, and as we see them, those are major challenges. Of course, it goes without saying that Europe is the first major economic partner for the African continent, sometimes the main political partner as well. But I would like to issue a word of warning. Please be careful in Europe, because China is coming. And given that China is coming, I prefer to speak this truth. When it comes to cooperation between Europe and the African continent, we need to sit down together and think through together what this cooperation should look like, and really look at the substance, the content thereof, because that's very important. And as part of the new negotiations which are in the offing for the ACP countries and Europe for the post-Cotonou agreement, so post-2020, we have a series of criteria that have been developed that are very important and which will further strengthen the economic relationship between Europe, the ACP countries, and Africa in particular. Europe has invested a lot in the African continent, and as I've just said, you are our main partner. But I don't believe that that cooperation should be limited to the things that we've already done so far and that we all know and are familiar with. The African continent needs a framework of peace, security and development for its further growth. And when I talk about development, I'm talking about real problems that our people face: access to drinking water, which is so important, energy, which is indispensable for our country. Today, Africa is not industrialized, and in order to make sure that the continent can become industrialized, of course, we need energy. You can't have factories if you don't have energy to run them. And if we want to industrialize the African continent and bring in big business, of course, we also need to think of education, training. There's not much point in dismantling a business in Belgium and setting it up in Tunisia, Kenya, Cameroon, Togo, or elsewhere in Africa if the people there don't have the qualifications that they need in order to run those factories, those businesses. So as part of this discussion that we're having with you today, we want to focus on the key sectors for development on the African continent. So not just the political aspects. We are aware of the political aspects, and the main responsibility for those is in the hands of the African leaders: peace, stability in our countries. But then when it comes to development, we believe that your support and your availability to work with us to help our political decision makers on those specific issues that are linked to development and transformation of the lives of our people and the economic transformation of our countries. That is very important. Thank you.
Follow up very quickly. I mean, yesterday at Friends of Europe, we had our own discussion on Africa, EU-Africa relations. And one of the things that all our African colleagues pointed out to was the young population of Africa, what an asset that is. And I was just wondering, how can Europe and Africa within the Beyond Cotonou work on the young people, creating jobs, providing growth prospects, inspiring young people?
Yeah, thank you. I just tell you, you know, of course, in Africa, we have the young people in our population is more than 50% in each our countries. But I think the first responsibility for the transformation of our life, of the young people life in Africa, is an African politician job. Why I say African politician job? Right now, you can decide, for example, to help the young people in Africa. If we don't have our own politics in Africa, in each country, you can do something with us. If in our country we decide ourselves to support the young people, to create a job of young people, I think young people can find a job, can work, and we can trade, or we can solve the poverty issue in our continent or in our countries, each our country in Africa. You have to know right now, if the European people, if you want to help us, we need to work together for our vision. I think it's my own opinion. It's not my opinion as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's my own opinion. First one, we need to have a vision in Africa. If we don't have a vision, we can do everything with us. You will see yourself. You won't have a good solution. If we have our vision and we work together, of course, we can decide what we will do for our young people.
Right.
The young people waiting for us right now because they don't have job. Sometimes they don't have a good education. Right now, we have a vision, and we want to share our vision with you. I think if we have the same vision, we decide together. It's like in framework, we can do something with our young population or young people.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Ambassador, for you, from the Caribbean, when we talk about modernization, adapting to new realities of this agreement beyond Cotonou, what does that signify for you in the Caribbean?
Thank you very much, Ada. Good morning, everyone. Before we jump to modernization, I'd like to suggest that there's a matter of the unfinished business of the Cotonou. And I think we all recognize that within our region, comprised of 16 member states of the ACP, with a population of about 35 million, that there is still much that needs to be done, albeit our being able to record that the existing relationship has made some inroads in improving and allowing us to meet some of our objectives. Three of the main areas, if I could just jump to those immediately, where I think that the old agreement has had some focus, but on which we need to continue to work. One has to do with our vulnerabilities. And I know traditionally we think of our vulnerabilities just in terms of the impact of, unfortunately, the increasing numbers and intensity of disasters. But our vulnerabilities can be seen at other levels as well, not just in terms of the natural disasters, but just endemic societal vulnerabilities and economic vulnerabilities arising from our circumstance of being small, open economies, island states, limited resource base, among others, and high, unfortunately, levels of unemployment. We also have to contend with the issue of middle income status, that designation. It's perpetual. Anyone who has been following the concerns of our region knows that that is very high on our agenda, and simply wanting to be in a partnership with those who would help with the advocacy around the issue, but also who will help to provide the kind of assistance that will mitigate some of the negative impact of our having that designation. And so you heard Stefano mention what happened in Dominica and how the GDP of that country was wiped out, and that, ironically, it is considered a middle-income country, which means that it doesn't have ready access to grants and concessionary finance. So that in itself is a very difficult situation, which so many of us face. Then climate change, uncomfortable reality for so many of us, for all of us, in fact, in our region. And I know it's not unique. The Pacific has that, other countries across the region. But we know that we have a special relationship with nature, regrettably, in a very negative way. And every year, in fact, the 1st of June, so just a few days ago, began the hurricane season began. All of us are sitting in great expectation. We have reports that this could be an active season. What does that mean? The need to build resilience is always part of your agenda. So when we look at Cotonou and when we look at the provisions of Cotonou, how have they helped us to meet those particular challenges, among others? And we all know that the global expectation, aspiration, was for it to help us in moving towards poverty eradication, which can only be possible when we are able to deal with the other issues. Let me just jump ahead with a view to respond to your question in terms of what do we expect of the new of the post-Cotonou. One, a continuation of a partnership that, despite its drawbacks, despite the fact that we have unfinished business, has served us well in important ways. And so we want to be able to leverage that numerical advantage that we have of having 107 members. We also want to ensure that development cooperation, which has been channeled into important areas of our economy, in the case of Jamaica, for example, the European Union has been a major contributor. The funding through the EDF has been significant on a number of fronts, and we want to be able to continue that. We also see that for 16 countries in a global context, we are small, and within our own selves, not enough to create that momentum that is needed to be able to address some of our critical issues. And we recognize that it is not a one-sided partnership, not a one-sided marriage. In fact, it benefits the EU as much as it does us, which is precisely why we are here. Had it not been for the fact that there is interest on both sides, we wouldn't be here. We also want to be able to promote and further deepen the relationship across the ACP countries. Sometimes we tend to forget that it's not just between the ACP and the EU, right, but across the A, the C, and the P together. We share common challenges, we share common opportunities, and we have great prospects and aspirations for being able to do that. And so we really want to see the new dispensation as one which helps us to benefit from the best practices, the good experiences of the past, but which will allow us to take on new challenges which are going to embrace that large section of young people, not just in Africa, but in all our countries, the high unemployment, the opportunities created by embracing the digital economy, the blue and green economy, which had less of an emphasis, and which will allow us to be able to make improvements in the relationship along the lines of the Economic Partnership Agreement, in which, for which the Caribbean was the first that had that arrangement, and perhaps can be able to share some of the benefits despite the advantages with the others. So we do think that there's an opportunity for us to move with greater commitment to something that clearly has shown the potential for benefiting all of us.
So really quite an ambitious agenda for the future, in addition to the unfinished business that you talked about. Thank you very much. Patrick, obviously three regions that you have to sort of coordinate, bring together, and work with the European Union. How are you doing it ahead of the negotiations that will be starting? What are your priorities as the ACP Secretary General in the coming months?
Thanks so much, Shada. What the ACP is poised to do now is, in fact, optimize this global political platform that we have. We're mature now. 43 years have brought us, not to middle age, to the 40th anniversary. And that means that we are starting at the global level, as our working group on future perspectives said, to make the ACP a more effective global player. We have been terribly effective in the WTO, special and differential treatment, and all the question of how least developed countries can have access to a level playing field in trade has been taken care of to some extent, and that battle continues. And we expect Europe to join with us and not join with Japan and the US too much on e-commerce, because we're approaching that. So the global political platform that we have together means that we are first going to encounter much more in terms of how we reform the UN system. It's clearly an issue that has to be faced in the 21st century, where the majority populations that come from India, come from the continent of Africa, and they have no representation in the Security Council that is permanent. So we are going to carry the battle, the confrontation, the issues at the global level. The global level also has been significantly important for us within the framework of the SDGs, particularly for climate change. We're going beyond that now. In fact, we don't have to go beyond the SDGs. We begin with number 1. Eradicating poverty in all its forms and everywhere. So we're joining with Europe in addressing the poverty that is in Europe also. The poverty that, in fact, brings about thinking of people in a very narrow way. So we will continue to be the catalyst that we have been, and shifting more and more to the global areas. And that helps us very much in using the strategic pillars that we've brought about, because the 40 years and the 43 years of Cotonou has been a trade and aid arrangement. We have now a political arrangement. From trade and aid, we don't have trade in terms of the export of primary commodities. We're looking at a transformative agenda so that, in fact, we are able to optimize the value of our raw material. So the extractive sectors, was here yesterday talking with Angola about diamond and how the polishing of the diamonds in Botswana now brings value addition to what we've been doing in exporting our jobs. What has happened is that I know our situation in sugar. We have done all the research work to advance the sugar industry, but where is it? In Reading University in England. Nothing remains in the Caribbean. So that new approach to commodities is around the transformation. So we can say partnering not only for growth, but for structural transformation of economies. That means industrialization. Industrialization means that we're not talking so much about aid in terms of how much we get from an EDF, but knowledge exchange, technology transfer. So that whole question of, that's where we're innovative now. That whole question of the EDF, yes, resources, and we do hope we can see what the Parliament has said about the EDF. If you do have to, that's your business in Europe. If you do have to move the EDF and put it in the budget, but you must ring fence. You must ensure a guarantee. If not, it cannot be development assistance that is predictable, that's over a period of time. We cannot have annual appropriations, and that yesterday, because something happens in Iraq, the parliament decides and the budget moves to Iraq. We have to have predictability, and now within the 7-year period, multi-annual financial framework gives us 7 years. We can do planning that way because we are on a transformative agenda.
Thank you.
Similarly, when we see political dialogue, it is not about electoral results, or whether you had elections good or bad. It is an ongoing political dialogue of policy issues, continental, global, national issues that embrace how we run the state. We are concerned about the new understanding of the state. We want the non-state actors. I don't like that term, non-state. We want the people participating. Our whole question of governance means that's the success of the Parliamentary Assembly, where the parliamentarians, of course, are able to make the resolutions, significant resolutions, on illicit financial flows. Where's all that money? Mbeki and that report. 60 billion annually leaving our countries as part of so-called investment that ends up somewhere. Where does it end up? In European banks mainly, in European Swiss banks. So what are we doing together, therefore? That's why this partnership is strongly political to address issues that are affecting day-to-day lives of people. The last point I want us to make briefly at this stage is how we see also the use of the broad young people that are there. And we have a Culture Plus program. I'm glad to see one of our staff here, Astrid, you there. When we speak of growth, we speak about growth for jobs. Cultural entrepreneurship is high on our agenda. We're very happy with the new project of 45 million for the cultural entrepreneurship of young people. They're creating movies. They're creating significant... If you haven't seen the film called Lamb, get onto it. Maybe it's on YouTube somewhere else. Great story of Ethiopia, about poverty, but a young woman who attempts to teach herself to be literate, reading in the candlelight, because she wants to be a veterinarian, so that food can be provided and animals can be raised. So the cultural program is a significant one. Where else do we bring together in the 79 countries the cultures of what's happening in the Pacific, what's happening in the Caribbean, the music, the talent, the art that is there. So there's lots of scope now that we are focused on transforming and action orientation. Thanks for now.
Thank you for now. Thank you very much, Patrick. I have to say, listening to all four of you, it's really quite inspiring to hear the agenda that you have and how committed you are to a relationship with the European Union. I'm going to open the floor to questions, and then Koen, I'll come to you when the questions come in. Let me just say that we also have the pleasure of having with us Louis Michel, who everybody knows in this room. And I was just wondering, Monsieur Michel, if very briefly, if you could comment on some of the things you've heard, the desire for modernization that is there, and just your brief insights, please. We have a microphone in the room that can be brought here to the fore. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Michel. Voilà. Merci. And I'll take 3 questions after this.
Tout d'abord, je voudrais...
First of all, I would like, of course, to express how pleased I am that this debate is being held, because this is a topic which, as I see it, is essential. And I've listened to those who've spoken, and I can share essentially most of what they've said. But there's just one thing. I didn't really hear anyone talking about the different options that are going to be presented for this post-Cotonou period, or for creating a new Cotonou which will be a real opportunity for the European and African continents. Now, it's clear that as part of that relationship, what makes sense is to have a win-win concept. There's no point in pretending to be angelic. Europe needs Africa just as much as Africa needs Europe. If you take a central issue, which is currently disfiguring all of European democracies, migration, for example, it's quite clear that this phenomenon, and I specifically don't refer to this as a problem, this phenomenon can only be solved, and it's linked to the large numbers of young people in African countries, and the fact that employment is of primordial importance for those young people. It is clear that if Europe can help through this partnership to make sure that there is good economic development in Africa and prosperity, then a major aspect of that phenomenon will be resolved. And so I can agree with the Minister for Foreign Affairs when he says that we have to focus on economic development. But we can't have economic development without education. Honourable Minister, you know that. At the same time, economic development and education also depend on governance. So if the public powers in those states do not take on the role that they have, then that will create a major problem. And this is already a big problem in our relationship, and I think we have to be bold enough to say that. Madam Moderator, if I could just have 1 minute, I think there are essentially 2 options. And those round the table today, some within the Commission are not quite on the same wavelength as me on this, but this is a debate, and that's why I think it's important to remind us all of certain options. Either we prolong what we have within the ACP countries just now. We change a few of the structural issues in order to deal with the arguments that I've put forward now, but that's just putting a sticking plaster over things. I don't think that will really make this negotiation a true opportunity. Personally, I don't think that's an acceptable way forward, because things are okay as they are, but that won't generate a real opportunity. And so I think there are questions we have to ask, and I'm not going to provide any answers to those questions so as not to put my old boss ill at ease. But the real question, I think, is whether this new round of negotiations shouldn't focus very closely on a specific and authentic partnership between the 2 continents, which are Africa and Europe. Now, I'm certainly not excluding the Caribbean and the Pacific in so saying, but I do think that there are possibilities for deepening much more in the Pacific and the Caribbean as well, and the agreements with the European Union. And that's what I wanted to say. I'm going to leave in just a moment, so if I could just conclude. There is one further point, Madam, that I would like to make. I wanted to say that I really regret that we only have one lady up on the stage and 5 men. We're talking about this all the time. Everyone's hammering home this point, and then when we have an opportunity to create true equality, we didn't do so. So, when it comes to women, gender policy is essential when it comes to economic development in all of our countries. That's all I wanted to say. There's so much more that I could add, but I'll go to a different room and take the stage. Thank you very much, Mr. Michel.
On the women's issue, we did try many women. I am the first to say that there cannot be male-only panels. You can believe it. But there were solutions, they could not make it. But that is an ongoing challenge. But you're absolutely right, and you're talking to someone who's already very interested in the topic. Thank you very much for your questions, Monsieur Michel. I will take 3 very quick questions, but they have to be brief. Otherwise, I will cut you off. So please, the lady over here.
Hello, my name is Céline Mias and I work for Care International. Actually, my question follows on from Mr. Michel's comments. We heard a lot about transformation from the speakers, but I haven't heard anything about transformation in gender relations and for women and girls, and also how you see the role of civil society in the future ACP-EU relations.
Excellent questions. Thank you very much indeed. The gentleman over here, please, very brief. We are under time pressure.
Good morning, I'm Mohamed Yassin, Dr. Mohamed Yassin from University of Udine. The question goes to Mr. Patrick and the Minister from Africa and Mr. Michel. What are the main elements which drive us from the Afro-pessimism in the relationship between Europe and Africa, which are could be considered as turning point to change the relationship between Africa and Europe from exploitation of resources and go for a better future relationship between Africa and the EU, given the new dynamics and the reshaping of the multilateralism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll take a question from that side. If I see a woman's hand up, I will give preference, but I do not, so let's take the gentleman over there.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. My name is Pascal Anaseka. I'm the director for the Center for African Entrepreneurship and Leadership based in the United Kingdom. I think my question is a summation of the last 2 speakers, not just in the context of what we're doing for our women and girls, but also more importantly, Mr. Minister, if I may ask you, what is actually Africa doing with Europe in terms of creating the pathways to ensure that our resources back in Africa are well utilized? And then secondly, what is Africa doing in terms of creating the pathways for young people to join the governance structures, if you may? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So 3 questions. I'm going to turn to the panel for responses. I was wondering, Minister Pato, if you would like to start off the comments and reactions to the comments you've heard.
Generally, I think well, let me talk from the Pacific's perspective. And I think we can have economic development, we can have education advancement, we can have empowerment. But these things are very critical when you come to look at the issue of security. Security is very important. So we have to look at the role of security. And the Pacific, for example, there's great interest by the countries of the EU. Recently, the French president visited our region. There's great interest by China. There's great interest by the United States. So the partnership to ensure security and stability will ensure prosperity to drive the agendas for gender equality, girls and women empowerment, education advancement. So that's a key concern for us. And of course, that brings us next to the issue of advancing these issues through fair and just trade. Because there is no fair, we can see the sentiments for protectionism around the world. But in Papua New Guinea, as we host APEC this year, we cannot see any element of disunity in the major global economies. They want to unite. So how do we, as a united force, the ACP and the EU, as partners into the future, how can we ensure? We did a lot in the WTO MC11 in Buenos Aires, but we need to do more work. We need to bring the Americans to the table. We need to get the Chinese and the Americans together, the Canadians and the Mexicans together. That is the work that we are trying to do, and these are some of the future experiences that the ACP partnership will work to deliver based on the shortcomings that we have learned from the past. And of course, I was talking about digital technology, climate change. They were never in the anticipation. They were never in the frameworks of the past agreements. And these are new challenges for Africa. These are new challenges for the Pacific. These are new challenges for the Caribbean. And we have a framework for development of the blue economy. And this is where our partnership will work best to bring prosperity, bring development for all of us. So I think we have to look at everything in context rather than isolating one aspect and say, look, this region has these unique circumstances. We have to look at different modalities for delivery of the programs for development, and but overall unity, togetherness is important because we are the largest organization globally because of our membership.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pato. So Koen, lots of questions for you, including from Monsieur Michel. Floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Shada. And indeed, I will obviously start by answering the question raised by Louis Michel, who, as always, when he intervenes, injects not just a dose of energy in the debate, but always also manages to put his finger on, let's say, the most delicate spot that needs to be discussed. And I do want to respond to it because it is an essential question. Why not just do things with Africa alone? Which, of course, has been a question. It is a question that's being asked, and it is one that has been debated. The answer to it is that we can actually, in this one, have our cake and eat it. There is no need to oppose a relationship between the EU and Africa to a relationship between the EU and the ACP. Both can easily be combined, and that's exactly what we want to do. It may not be trendy, because the trend of today seems to be for casser la baraque. Member states leave the Union, countries do not respect WTO, unilateral trade sanctions, unilateral changes of borders. I think that what we have chosen to do with our ACP partners precisely is to renovate the house without burning it down. And to do that, we basically started by saying, what is it that we want to do together? And the added value of this partnership is fundamentally and essentially a political one. It is in a world where multilateralism is under pressure. It is in a world where economic development, notwithstanding all the lip service, is becoming maybe less sustainable and less inclusive than it was before, is to say, this is not our agenda. Europe stands for an economic development that is sustainable and inclusive. And what we find when we talk to our partners in Africa, in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, is that they have this same idea, une certaine idée du monde.
So they have a certain idea of the world.
Agenda, which we need to defend together against other players in the world who may not have that shared vision. That's our bottom line. That is the foundation on the basis of which we build the partnership. Now, on top of that, and I call it foundation, because on top of that foundation, we basically build three houses. One with Africa, one with the Caribbean, and one with the Pacific. Why? Precisely because our relations and the challenges that each of these regions face are different, are specific. also mutually. The interests are different. And so obviously what we will do with Africa in the Africa pillar will be different from what we concentrate on with the Caribbean or what we concentrate on with the Pacific. And so it is perfectly possible, I think, to have, as I said, your cake and eat it in this case.
Okay, Koen. So just a quick follow-up, because there was 2 questions actually about civil society engagement as well. And, you know, European Development Days are not just about governments and officials and excellencies. It's also about people. It's about civil society. It's about all of us and the impact development has on us or does not have on us. So how will this Beyond Cotonou actually tweak, change the connection, the rapprochement, the connection between civil society and officialdom?
Well, let me start by saying that, and I think Stefano has mentioned it already, our ACP-EU partnership, from that point of view, the involvement of civil society has been way ahead of the curve. No other partnership, no other development partnership has ever so early started by involving civil society CSOs right from the start. That is the case now, that was the case in the past, and that obviously will remain the case in the future. So the ideas we have for the post-Cotonou framework will build on what we already do and make sure that civil society organizations in Europe and in our partner countries are active contributors to the policy debates that subsequently shape the actions that we do together.
Okay, let me thank you. Promise that we will be watching, as they say. Make sure it really happens. Thank you very much. So let's turn to the 4 panelists now for very quick wrap-ups on the different comments, but also what you've heard from Koen and what each of you has said. So let's start with you, Ambassador.
I just have a quick comment in relation to gender, clearly a very important issue. And in your defense and for the defense of the organizers of the panel, the reality is that this was to have been a panel of foreign ministers. And the fact that we have a limited number of foreign ministers suggests that there's room for government to consider their own responsibility to ensure that they appoint women at sufficiently senior levels to be able to contribute in this way. I'm pleased that I'm able to be here representing my minister today. And certainly on her behalf, and certainly for us as Jamaica, we have a good solid reputation in terms of our appointment of women at many levels, including within the private sector. And this allows me to make the leap to say that one of the areas in which we would wish to see the partnership make greater inroads is in an involvement of women in entrepreneurship, especially young women, through capacity building, through training, and through the investment in the MSMEs, where we find a number of them, because clearly without an enlightened population, certainly on the gender front, and may I make a very special plea also, because we've been focusing so much on women, and certainly this is the objective of EDD this year, that we tend to forget that a corresponding problem in our region is young unemployed males. So we do want to make a plug for them as well, and to wish all the best for the gender orientation of our activities this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Patrick.
Yes, well, we intend to institutionalize the role that non-state actors should play, either under what we call the interregional or the interagency consultative mechanism. It will be a permanent mechanism, so we'll have the voices of the non-state actors ongoing for consultation on policies right across our 3 strategic pillars. The second area we want to really optimize on is the higher education. EduLink, Erasmus Mundus have brought together people at university levels, and we have a storehouse of knowledge there. And that has to be captured now and put into much more what we call case studies for South-South, but also for triangular cooperation. So we're drawing on the higher educations, drawing on the universities, technical level schooling. So we pull that together as a repertoire to energize and to catalyze the thinking.
Thank you very much. Minister Pato.
Thank you. I think we need to involve the non-government organizations, the civil society more. We're doing that in the Pacific, speaking for my own country, Papua New Guinea, we're working very closely with the churches, we're working closely with women, and I think the EDF 10 and now EDF 11 have been effective in some of the delivery of the programs for us in the area. I think we need to do more. The governance is a major issue. We certainly need non-governmental organizations, including NGOs, to be proactive in this kind of discussions, as well as the role of the pillars on which we want to progress forward in the next 20 years post-2020. So civil society is very important, and we would like to work with civil society and girls and women, for which, of course, in my own country also, we've got more women and girls in schools than ever before, because we've now provided free education, and we've got up to 1.2 million people in schools now, half of which are women and girls, which was never the case.
Right, thank you. Ministre Ducy, so your comments, but also there's a question that I think might be quite relevant for you that has come from the participants. It's about health issues having no borders. So how important do you think the health issue should be in your relationship with Europe? But your comments as well on what you've heard.
Merci, je voudrais...
Thank you. I would like to make one brief comment to say that development of the African continent belongs first and foremost to the Africans. I apologize if that's disturbing for you, but I think we have to speak the truth. For Africans such as myself, it's our responsibility to develop our continent. We have a partnership with Europe, and that partnership is there to help us to improve in certain ways on that development. But if people think that we should just sit still in Africa, do nothing, and wait for our friends from Europe, China, or the US to come and develop the African continent in our stead, then that is a mistake. First and foremost, this is the responsibility of the Africans. And in order to guarantee that we do develop our continent, one of the first starting points, not to say the first starting point, is education. We must focus on education and training, and make sure that we guarantee a good level of training, a good level of health within the population before we start talking about jobs, even jobs for young people. What's the point in creating jobs for young people who are in ill health, who don't have access to food, who don't have the requisite training? So it's up to the African people, in particular the African leaders, heads of state, to take on those responsibilities. And we are fortunate that at this moment in time in the African continent, and I hope to cheer you up a little bit, because there is good news amongst the bad news, we do have African leaders who do have that sense of responsibility and who are working on developing the continent, and we must encourage those leaders.
So, you know, I'm not Afro-pessimistic, I'm Afro-optimistic. But you have to know, if you need to develop our countries or our continent, we need to have a vision. If we don't have a vision, you can do something without vision. If we don't have a vision, the European people, for example, come in our continent, what we can do together? Sometimes I discuss with one of my friends, foreign affairs of minister in the African countries. They say, I received yesterday, I discussed with a European functionary. They come in my country, they want to open the school, they want to open school of hospital. But they ask me where we can put the hospital, when we can put the school. He told me, one of my friends, he told me, I will discuss with him and I will ask him or ask the team when they want to put the hospital. I told him no. When they come to see you, you have to tell him, I want to put the hospital here, because in this village, in this region, we need a hospital. This another region, we need school, etc., etc. When we don't have a vision, when we just stay like you and I, and we're waiting for, God comes, we are the European people, the American people, the Chinese people, come just to tell us you can do something, I think it's not serious if we have this vision. If we have a vision, we can try to help our population, because first one is education, is a health for our population. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists for their comments and responses. answers. Thank you to all of you, and I apologize to those whose questions I couldn't take. Just a few takeaways from me on what has been actually a very passionate and I think inspiring discussion. I think what we really understand when we talk about the Beyond Cotonou is that Europe needs the ACP just as much as the ACP needs Europe. I think it really is, and I can say that from my perspective, an interdependent, interconnected relationship. Interesting, Stefano talked about the history, and I was there, I saw it happen. It does predate globalization. It does. This dialogue, this convention that we had then was really ahead of its time, but it needs modernization. And to do that, I think we've got several new ideas from here, working together on the global field within the United Nations framework, on climate change, on Agenda 2030, on reinforcing the trade order, political relationship, security issues that all of you have emphasized as very important. And each one of you from your regions has brought forward, I think, very interesting and significant new ideas about how we can tweak and change this relationship to make it more relevant to the 21st century. There's a great deal of importance being paid, at least, verbally, to women and civil society. I have to say this talk is new. This talk is important. I think it's a breakthrough moment on those issues, but we have to plow on. We have to make sure that we walk the talk on these issues. And I think the final thing, really, Minister Ducey, you said it. I think the narrative on Africa really has to change. Change and transformation are taking place on the continent. There is a vision, I think, at least there is a vision on paper, and we have to invest in making that vision come true. So the responsibility indeed is yours in Africa, in the ACP group, and we can co-work. I think we can co-develop together. So I think that would be my final takeaway. This really is a moment where partnership has to become a reality in this relationship. So thank you again all for being here. Just a final word. So the ceremony is now going to start. We're running a tiny little bit late here. It'll start at 11 o'clock. It'll be projected on screens outside, so please do watch. Interesting start to the discussion already here. But the formal beginning is now, and you'll be hearing from several heads of state and also from the European Commission. So once again, thank you very much. Tweet on, and see you all later.